You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Adler and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 627, where on this episode, I am going to be looking at The Force Awakens 10 years later. I know there have been a number of other people who have done this type of 10 years later format. I will say, just quickly out of the gate, we were one of the first. Like, we've been doing the whatever years later all the way back as far as, 2016, I think? 2015 is when we first did our first show like that. So anyways, this is a retrospective look. It's going to be a little bit different, I think, than some of the other retrospectives that we've done in the past, only because, as I've mentioned leading up to this show, I hadn't really had a chance to talk about The Force Awakens because I wasn't part of the show when it actually came out. And so I've not had a chance to kind of talk about my own personal experience, the things that, leading up to it, all of the media and the hype and the zeitgeist that existed at that time. And so I really want to spend some time talking about it because it was a very special time, at least for me personally, and I know for a lot of other folks as well. So it may be a little bit different than we've done in the past, but I'll still hit on all the same kind of beats, exactly. And we'll talk more about the actual movie and some of the big moments in the movie as the show progresses. So I want to say thank you, first off, out of the gate, to all of our Patreon members, especially our now part of the tribe members. That's Alex, Danny, Dante, Daz. I've got a Brad feeling. Jackson, Jacob, Josh, Mike, Paisley, Reader Reborn, Riss Bayless, Sharkman Dan, Uncle Leon, and our top tier, which is the Delusions of Grandeur members. This is Rod Racing, Rob, and Steve. Thank you guys so much. If you're interested in Patreon, you can head over to this link up here, over here, and click on that, and it'll take you into the Patreon page and sign up for as little as $2 and get the whole back catalog of episodes that we've done over the years. Also, let's see. I want to say thank you to our YouTube membership. So if you're not a Patreon member and you want to support the show via YouTube, you can sign up for the YouTube memberships. They're only $1. You get some cool little emojis and that sort of thing. But so far, we've got Illuminera, Sky, Katya, Kathy, my Star Wars guys who's in the chat tonight, Nikki, and Alex, who I think is going to be here. Yeah, he's here as well. So all of you guys have already subscribed. Thank you so much for doing that. It does mean a lot for, honestly, the support of the show and to keep things going. So thank you for doing that. And then for those of you that are in the chat tonight, my Star Wars guys, Alex is here, Qui-Gon J, Music Train, and One Up versus CPU, and looks like that's it for now. But thank you all so much for joining the chat. Feel free to chime in on your personal experiences. I've got to be kind of hopefully throwing some questions out there. I really am interested in to understand how this was for everyone else and what that the experiences were like for everybody as well. So, okay, I'm going to jump right into the show because there's quite a little bit to discuss here. So I want to first kind of talk about how we got to The Force Awakens. And so I don't mean this so much to be as a history lesson, but I think the context matters. And it's very fascinating to me to really take a look at how The Force Awakens came to be, how the sequel trilogy came to be, especially as someone like myself who grew up with the original trilogy. So this goes all the way back to 2012 when, of course, Disney purchased Lucasfilm for $4 billion, which, in hindsight was quite a bargain, if you ask me. But the official press release at that time said, for the past 35 years, one of the greatest pleasures has been to see Star Wars passed from one generation to the next, said Lucas, chairman and CEO of Lucasfilm. In a statement, he says, "It's now time for me to pass Star Wars to a new generation of filmmakers." So when that deal happened, there were a lot of people that felt like this was a great decision. A lot of people felt like this was a bad decision. I was more on the side of this being a good decision, a great decision at times, because I really felt, as George Lucas did, that I wanted this Star Wars to exist for years and years to come. And being under a single owner, single creator like that it had some constraints on it, so it made sense that at some point he was going to pass it on. I was happy with the fact that it went to Disney, And I'm not going to say that they've got everything right. They've had a lot of misses, but they've had a lot, probably, in my opinion, they've had more highs and lows. And so I think overall it was good for the franchise. It was good for George Lucas. And I'll get into the context of, whether or not The Force Awakens was really what George Lucas wanted. I think the short answer is probably no on that, but I'll talk about that as well. But I remember in 2012 when this was first announced, again, there were people on both sides of the fence. We were in the midst of the Clone Wars. I think season 4 was coming out at that time, or maybe it was just wrapping up. I forget. It was around that time, season 4, season 5, that finally came out. Disney Star Wars Rebels wouldn't be out for another 2 years, and so we were kind of in this weird place that was very reminiscent of the Dark Times. That period after Return of the Jedi, and before Heir to the Empire came out. It felt like that in a lot of ways. Star Wars really wasn't at the forefront of pop culture. It wasn't really, as discussed as it is today. And we were just coming off the prequel trilogy. It'd been a while, been 7 years at that point since we had any Star Wars. So we were kind of in this weird place. Now we were deep in Legends. Like there was tons and tons of Legends books that were coming out. Comic books were coming out. We had just gotten Darth Plagueis in January of that year, or February. So at the very beginning of 2012 that we got Plagueis. So that was a really big book, big kind of monumental moment for getting some background on how all of that played out. But when Disney came in and purchased it, a lot of people were questioning what's the future going to look like. Fast forward to the deal that was made. So we all know now at this point that Lucas had turned over script treatments for 6, 7, and 8. And if you've read Bob Iger's book, he does kind of discuss about how, the episodes that we got were definitely not what Lucas had pitched. And you almost get a sense there was kind of some regret maybe, or some remorse that maybe he felt like he had led them on to believe that more than he did. Lucas has been very open about feeling like he'd been hurt and betrayed in some ways because of that. The stories didn't pan out the way that he had wanted them. I just want to quote something here from Bob Iger on that note. He says, "The truth was Kathy, JJ, Alan, and I discussed the direction in which the saga would go, and we all agreed that it wasn't what George had outlined. George knew we weren't contractually bound to anything, but he thought our buying the story treatments was a tacit promise that we'd follow them, and he was disappointed that his story was being discarded." I would, at some point I want to get around to making videos of, or talking about at least the script treatments and what Lucas's plan was out there. A lot of people have done them. A lot of people probably did them better than I will do, but there are some of those out there. If you're interested, you can go kind of understand where this came from. But I mean, the key takeaway is really nothing was used. I mean, there were some, not everything. There were some things that were used, Luke being in exile, a female protagonist lead, some of those kind of bigger beats or bigger moments were in there. But for the most part, it was a very different script than what George Lucas had originally intended when he sold this to Disney. And I'm going to get into J.J. Abrams now, because this is where the moment when Abrams was announced as coming on as a writer and eventually become the director for this, I was super excited for it, or maybe I had that reversed. But either ways, I was a huge fan. I've said this on the show many times. I'm a big fan of J.J. Abrams. I get it. This guy is not for everybody. There's a lot of things that he does that really that people question. He lives in this mystery box, way of storytelling, but I actually like it. And maybe I'm one of the few. Maybe I'm someone who's, I don't know. I mean, I grew up on some of this storytelling that was very similar, but I remember going back and watching like Alias and Lost and Fringe and those television series, even Felicity to some extent. And just the mystery box approach is really fascinating to me. I loved it. And I hate it too at the same time. Like the idea that all these things would be told, like we'd get teasers for different things and stories and plots and threads and hooks. And then some of it never either came to pay off or we never knew anything more about it. I totally understand where the frustration is at. But for me, going in, having been a fan of those TV series, and then also like Mission Impossible 3, when he did that for me kind of reignited the series and really kind of set the tone for what those movies were going to be like going forward. I enjoyed his Star Treks, Star Trek 1, Star Trek 2 as a director on those. I love the lens flare. I thought he did a great job with Super 8. And then, the Cloverfield stuff that he was a producer of. So I say all this because as me as a fan back then when this Force Awakens was announced, or Sequel 7 was announced, the fact that J.J. Abrams was being involved was a huge, huge plus for me. I was already euphoric because of the announcement and some of the things that I knew I was going to be getting. But this really kind of put me over the edge and put me in a space where I could not wait for this movie to come out. I want to segue just quickly. I want to talk just quickly about the way fandom was, for at least from my own personal experience back in around 2013, 2014, as well. I just came from Fan Force Austin is a local group here in Austin where we get together and talk about Star Wars. But I had just come from there, and we were talking, reminiscing about the Force Awakens and what the fandom was like at that time. And we had this discussion about, what was bigger? Was a bigger moment for us the sequel trilogy or the prequel trilogy in '99 being released, or was it the Force Awakens? And I think your mileage may vary depending on where you were, what sequel trilogy or what trilogy you grew up with. But for me, I remember being super excited. First off, I want to say I was very excited when the '97 special editions came out. That was a very, very special time, being able to see Star Wars in the theater with all the new editions. It was just a great time, but it still felt like that wasn't captivating large masses of audiences, but it still was a lot. I mean, it's still, the high was super high. Fast forward a couple of years later to '99, and I don't know that you could ever get there again. I mean, you think about it, we had waited almost 15 years for the prequel trilogy to come out, and there were stories that we had thought about and read about and theorized about with our friends. That was another level of just fandom and euphoria for waiting that long for that prequel trilogy to come out. And so it was a very, very special time. And then you fast forward all the way until we get to 10 years later now, after Revenge of the Sith, when we get to The Force Awakens. For me, I would almost argue they're pretty much similar. And I know that's not true for everybody. I know a lot of people have said, hey, '99 was it. Like that was like peak Star Wars fandom and craziness. But for me, I think the Force Awakens announcement was pretty high up there. And I say this because I grew up with the original trilogy, of course, right? My heroes were Luke, Leia, and Han. I loved the idea that I was going to get to learn about Anakin and Kenobi and Yoda and, potentially other characters that would be introduced later in the series. I love that idea, but those weren't really my heroes. I didn't really grow up with those, looking up to those people. Mine were Han, Luke, and Leia. And so when we get to 7, when we get to 2012 or 2014, when they first announced around there, 2014, when the original cast members were announced for coming back, that kind of really escalated the hype for me, because I was going to finally get to see my heroes once again on the big screen that I didn't get to see, of course, with the prequel trilogy. And so for me personally, I feel like they're really close in terms of the hype and the excitement. And again, that euphoria feeling that you had going into the Star Wars movies. But they probably teeter from time to time. So I want to set that up just because I want you guys to understand where I was coming from. Again, excited to see my heroes back on the big screen, have Star Wars back on the screen, big screen, having J.J. Abrams, somebody that I really loved and admired their work. He was coming in. It was just like everything was happening in a perfect world for me at that time. So the writing, going back to the writing. So Abrams finishes writing the script in 2014. He was, of course, he had some help there with Kazdan and Arndt, I think, were the other two people that helped write the script. And Rian Johnson was rumored back in 2014 to be picking up episode 8. And so there was a moment there where they were kind of collaborating. There was we were talking a lot about what that was going to look like, and everything looked really good, felt really good. Didn't really turn out that way, but more on that later. And then per Daisy Ridley, I want to just mention this too. She was, there was a quote from her, and I forget where it was. I think it might've been during the Rise of Skywalker, if I'm not mistaken. But I do remember her saying that Abrams had actually written a draft script for 8 and 9. So this is before Johnson had come in. He had already written a draft script for 8, already written one for 9. And when Johnson came in, he pretty much got rid of all of that stuff. And so I'll get into the whole kind of disjointedness and the disconnectedness that we've talked about a lot on this show. And a lot of people also have talked about over time. But I'll talk about that here shortly. But it is interesting to know that he had some script drafts in there. And so that would be another like gold mine outside of the Colin Trevorrow stuff that has already been done. I'd love to see, in George Lucas's treatments, I'd love to see what Abrams had planned, right, for all of this stuff. But that's another topic for another time. Let's talk quickly about the casting. I think I mentioned in 2013, I think I said 2014, but 2013 was when Carrie, Harrison, Mark were all rumored to be part of the sequel trilogy. They were confirmed a year later, by February. We also had Daisy and Adam coming in around that time. You had Andy Serkis, Oscar Isaac in 2014, John Boyega, and then pretty much everybody was officially cast by the time we got to April 29th, as part of the big cast announcement. And I do want to bring up a picture here, because I shared this. We were talking about this on social media not too long ago. I posted something about it, but I'm going to share my screen because I do want to pull up this cast picture. If you guys remember, again, this is kind of let's go down memory lane here a little bit, but there was a time when I think it was on the official Star Wars website where you can see it right here. But you guys remember when this was shown and we got to see the cast members here talking about, it was a kind of a round, they were doing a table reading here. But you can see Harrison Ford, Abrams is back there. There's Lawrence Kasdan over here on this side. You've got Adam Driver, John Boyega, Oscar Isaacs, Andy Serkis is down here, Mark Hamill. I think this might be Anthony Daniels. I really couldn't tell on that. That might be Domhnall Gleeson. Carrie's over here talking to Daisy. But just this picture at the time was incredible to see. Like the idea that all these guys were here and just seeing like it was real, like it was very substantial that we were going to get episode 7 was absolutely phenomenal. And then it was shortly after that, Star Wars Celebration Europe 2. This was back in 2013 in July. That's when John Williams, the maestro himself, was announced that he was coming back. I mean, Kathleen Kennedy came up on stage. Warwick Davis was doing the interview, and he was begging her, "You got to tell us something. You got to tell us something about Windows 7. Tell us something about Episode 7, so that we can leave with." And she announced that John Williams would be coming back, not to just do one movie, but he'd be doing the trilogy, all 3 of the movies. So that was huge to know that John Williams was coming back. So there's a lot of speculation and discussion about whether or not we were going to get the same kind of music or get a completely different composer. But again, everything was just lining up to be perfect for me in just about every way. I do want to mention too that around this time, it really was kind of the onset for, podcasts and news, like Star Wars related websites and forums. They were kind of in a lull, in my opinion. I mean, there were not a whole lot of podcasts out there. A lot of the ones that had flared up, at times are gone. In 2013, we were still pretty new into that podcast space. I'm not saying that there weren't any, but by the time, as the years progressed over the next couple of years between 2013 and 2015, you suddenly saw this huge surge of podcasts and YouTube video channels and, more discussion coming out. By the time the movie released, that's when you saw podcasts, this podcast included, absolutely skyrocket in terms of downloads and views because everybody needed someone to talk to, myself included. You wanted to hear other people talking about this. You wanted to hear different opinions and views and theories and speculation. And so this movie and the resurgence, this awakening, for lack of a better term, of the Force and of Star Wars really propelled the creators of Star Wars to go and brought in a lot of new creators that came in as a result of that. So very cool to see that. I mean, if you look at Dig, you guys remember Dig and Reddit? Those were 2 sites that really kind of exploded around the same time, not because of Star Wars, but Star Wars was able to kind of ride the success of at least Reddit. Dig was on its way out, but Reddit was a place that Star Wars was really kind of able to ride that wave of media and hype and just all the fervor that goes with the movie coming out here. Around that same time, I want to bring this up too. This is a funny one too. Do you guys remember this poster here? So this was a poster that was done by MTV News, and they had pulled in somebody by the name of Old Red Jalopy, and he was kind of like he is. I don't know if he's still around, but he was a digital artist at the time. And they took all the actors that had already been announced. We didn't know who was playing what, but this poster was viral. I mean, it was everywhere. You couldn't, at least in the circles that I ran around in, you could not escape this poster and everybody was talking about it. And you look back now and it's actually pretty funny to see, who's in what position here. I mean, they've got Adam Driver down here as kind of like this Mandalorian looking person. You've got you got Andy Serkis here, he's holding a blaster. I don't know. He looks like he's probably playing a bad guy there. You've got Daisy Ridley, with this little circlet on her head. So maybe they were assuming that she was going to be a princess. Oscar Isaac looks more like I don't know, maybe a king or I'm not even sure what he's supposed to look like here. But then you've got Luke and Han in their roles. We know that's not going to change. You've got Leia looking more like, Mon Mothma here, not necessarily more Jedi. And then you've got John Boyega here and Domhnall Gleeson as Jedi. So this was a huge thing. I still laugh when I see this, and kudos, not in a bad way. I think it's really charming, but this started all the kinds of like fan photos and mock-up posters and fan videos that people were starting to come up with. And we see that now. I mean, it's very common. We expect that to happen. But at the time, this was really kind of the first, the birth of a lot of it, which would grow on to be some really silly stuff that was out there. Alex says, I love those silly made posters. Yeah. And this was really, again, like the beginning of it. So really good stuff. But anyways, I just want to mention that too, because again, I'm talking about what it was like back then. I know some people that are watching or listening, weren't old enough really to kind of remember a lot of that stuff. Maybe weren't as into Star Wars to kind of remember what was going on behind the scenes. So I just want to kind of talk about it because I think it was really a special and fun time. So let's talk about the promotion and the actual opening. So let's talk about the trailers first off. The very first trailer we ever got was in November 28th, 2014. This was during, it was an 88 second trailer, the teaser trailer. And I know you guys all know what I'm talking about here. It was shown in the theaters. It was shown on YouTube. Apple Trailers had it as well. And at that time, here in Austin, where I'm from, I wasn't living in Austin at the time, but in Austin, Alamo Drafthouse was showing the trailer. They showed it 17 times in a row. And they did this before, like on a Saturday morning before their normal movies started up. And I was just talking to Chris Cavazos, who actually I'm going to probably have on the show here soon. He kind of runs Fan Force Austin. He actually went to it. Him and one of the other guys there went to it. And he mentioned they had brought in like breakfast tacos for a lot of people because it was, you got the tickets, you won the tickets like kind of in a lottery thing. And then it was really first come, first serve for who got there in line and got a seat would obviously get to watch the trailer. But that's how big this trailer was. I mean, it was absolutely huge. I mean, 58 million downloads or views in the first week on YouTube alone. And at the time, I mean, 58 million may not seem like a lot, but back then in 2014, that was huge numbers that were coming out for that. But yeah, the idea that Alamo Drafthouse was just showing this trailer over and over and over again was kind of speaks to just what the excitement was like and what the fever of fandom was like at that time. I feel like this trailer still is one of the best, if not the best. I mean, for me, it's like the best Star Wars trailer that's ever come out. It's up there in terms of like just creating the hype and mystery and intrigue than any other trailer out there ever, quite honestly. So, everything from the wind blowing, we're getting dark and the wind's blowing and suddenly Finn pops up and he's a stormtrooper and we get the stormtroopers kind of rattling and the blacking out of them in some kind of a shuttle of sorts. The voiceover, there's been an awakening, seeing Kylo Ren walk up and ignite his lightsaber. He's kind of hunched over and ignites his lightsaber. And the first time we ever see a cross-hilt lightsaber, all of those moments, especially, and then it kind of culminates in that shot, that in the immortalized shot now, legendary shot of the Falcon kind of spinning up and Abrams following that camera and us spinning upside down while the music of John Williams plays in the background and then taking off in between two, right past two TIE fighters. That, I mean, it was just enough to really get everybody just over the top and super excited for this. I mean, it was really one of the most powerful teaser trailers that we've ever gotten. Fast forward about a year later, we then get in 2015, back in October, we get the second trailer for episode 7. And this one is shown during Monday Night Football. This is the Giants who was it? It was the Giants and the Eagles, I think. I forget now. Giants and Eagles might have been playing. It was like an NFC division game. And as a Cowboys fan, I hate both of those teams. So there's no way I was going to watch. There was no way I really wanted to watch ESPN, watch Monday Night Football, but that was enough to get me to watch that game because I waited and waited for that trailer. And again, incredible trailer. The follow up was just as big in my opinion as that first one was. Much longer. We got more exposition and more details about what that movie was going to look like. But again, these were events that were happening. The next day on Good Morning America, everybody was talking about it. They had shown it there, and I remember going into the workforce and going into work that week, and that's all we talked about was this trailer and how much we were excited to see Star Wars come back and theorizing already on what we'd saw and who was going to be who and that sort of thing. Just a great time. My Star Wars guy says that Phantom Menace trailer was up there too. Yeah, it was. That was a whole nother moment, and I talked about it on the 25th anniversary of the Phantom Menace. But it definitely was up there as well. Like a different time and different way that we consumed that media at the time, and a different way we talked about it. But was a really good trailer as well. I would agree. And then I don't want to short anything here, but like the Vanity Fair, if you guys remember on the May 17th issue that they did, or it was May 7th issue that they did in 2015. That was our first look. And Vanity Fair had always done this. They'd always kind of given exclusive. Lucasfilm had given them kind of the exclusive rights to kind of give the show the first photos. They bring in Annie Leibovitz, who does all the photography, and that was our first look at Rey in her costume, the scavenger costume that we would come to know and see. We got our first look at, Chewie and Han and just, it was a really great time. A lot of people bought those magazines, it was, I still have mine. I was going to pull it out and get a chance to get it before this show started tonight. And then this also kind of brought about the Force Friday thing. So September 4th, 2015 was the first Force Friday. And that was going to be an ongoing thing for all three of the movies, and it's part of the sequel trilogy. And if you're unfamiliar with Force Friday, that was the big marketing toy merchandising day, right? They would release everything, figures and pops and whatever it was. That was going to be the day that they would sell all of that, and they did that in Toys R Us and all that. And then we got to, and I'll just quickly, real quick, we got to the Last Jedi, and they did Force Friday there, and then we didn't get anything in The Rise of Skywalker. Again, I was talking to Chris about this, and I think one of the more prevailing theories, or maybe even rumors, is that by the time we got to The Rise of Skywalker, whether it be toys weren't as selling as much anymore, or the fact that Toys R Us was gone, like one of their primary outlets was now out of business. The fact that more people were buying stuff on Amazon, there were more exclusives online versus going into stores. But something happened along the way that Force Friday just kind of died off by the time I got to The Rise of Skywalker. And I say that because going into that Force Friday for the Force Awakens was really special. Like, I mean, it was absolutely bonkers, absolutely chaotic. It did not match the chaos that was part of the Phantom Menace, right? That's another beast in itself. Like, I don't even know that we've ever seen like the hysteria that comes with buying toys as we saw in the Phantom Menace. But the Force Awakens wasn't too shabby either. I mean, it was still pretty crazy, still chaotic, but really good times. Like, I remember even during the Force Awakens, I remember standing in line at Toys R Us to buy stuff, and just, it felt like I was standing in line to buy movie tickets. I was talking to people. Everybody was super excited. It was just a really great time to kind of be a Star Wars fan and knowing that we were going and buying new toys and figures and that sort of thing. And I would say the same thing about The Last Jedi. We didn't know anything about The Last Jedi. And so I stood in line with some of those same exact people a couple years later at that exact same Toys R Us and talking about, what the next movie was going to be like and what's going on with Luke and why was he just shown at the very end? Is he, good? Is he bad? Whatever it was. As a collector, those were really important moments as part of, the build up to The Force Awakens. The tickets went on sale on October 19th. And of course, the movie premiered on December 18th. The budget, let's get into just some quick numbers. So the budget was $245 million-ish. The domestic opening was $247 million. So they actually made all their money back from the domestic opening weekend, yes. The total intake for domestic was about $940 million-ish. And the worldwide was 1.1. So $1.1 billion. So when you add it all in, this movie at the box office raked in about $2.1 billion. So you figure they had already earned about half of what they paid for the entire franchise. And this was part of, I think, fair criticism, right? Iger was like, hey, we're going to be cranking out a movie every 2 years. And a lot of it was they were trying to recuperate that $4 billion amount of money. And I think we said it on this show too, like Disney is, if you had to put your faith into a company that has the financial backing and support to kind of crank out a movie every 2 years, Disney's not a bad bet, right? It's going to have to be one of these bigger companies. And so that's why they had kind of streamlined and fast tracked a lot of these movies to come out. But I mean, they were off to an incredible start to think that they'd already earned half of what they purchased Lucasfilm for with just this one movie. And that doesn't even include all of the merchandising that went into it and licensing and all that. I mean, I didn't even do the research for any of that stuff. I'm just talking strictly ticket sales. It was a phenomenon. I mean, I saw The Force Awakens by myself that when it first opened on December 18th. I think I had like an 8:00 showing. There was like an 11:30, and then I had like a 2 something, like 2 a.m. I saw all 3 of those movies, all at Alamo Drafthouse. It was, again, an event. It was an experience to kind of go in and see it. And I remember too that when I went into the Alamo Drafthouse, they actually had like this storefront that was there. It's where I got this that I'm wearing tonight, this little sweatshirt here that says Star Wars: The Force Awakens. I'm terrible with trying to get this stuff to show up on the camera because it's always reverse. It had, you can see there, it had like the dates on the back for all the Star Wars movies. It had this really cool liner inside where it's kind of, you can see like hyperspace. I mean, it was called like the Galactic Store or something like that. And there was all kinds of merchandise that were available that you could buy before you went into the theater. They were handing out glasses that you could buy as well, like the little tumbler glasses. But and that was like the only time. But I remember talking to the person there, and I forget now who it was that set that up. But they're like, oh yeah, we've got I don't know, a license or agreement with Lucasfilm to do this for the next 2 movies. And it was the only time they did it. At least in my area. Maybe if you were part of it and you saw it during The Last Jedi or The Rise of Skywalker, let me know. But this felt like it was a one and done because they never came back to the Alamo Drafthouse. So anyways, I saw that the first 3 showings by myself. The next day I ended up taking my kids after I had slept. I took them to see it a few times. And then over the next week, I saw it maybe a couple more times as well. But, I'm going to get into, I guess at this point, my experience with actually watching the movie. And so I don't know, as Star Wars fans, if you're listening to this podcast, watching this episode here on YouTube, there is something very special about Star Wars on the big screen, regardless of what movie it is. There's just something special about Star Wars, in my opinion. And this one was no exception. In fact, I remember sitting down for that first time and really almost pinching myself thinking, is this really happening? Am I really seeing episodes 7, 8, and 9, movies that had only been talked about, that had been rumored to have existed on paper somewhere in scripts and drafts that George Lucas had written years ago. I was finally coming in and seeing. Now, of course, I didn't know them. This is what I was thinking, not knowing that, they hadn't used Lucas's script treatments, of course. But I remember, but either way, it was still kind of a special moment to be sitting there and being part of Star Wars and being part of Episode 7 and having waited 10 years to finally see Star Wars on the big screen again was pretty amazing. And when that crawl comes up and you see Episode 7, you see The Force Awakens, and you see that first line of Luke Skywalker has vanished, I was teary-eyed. I got really teary-eyed on that first viewing. But at the same time, I was like trying to suppress my emotions because holy crap, this thing's scrolling up and I'm trying to read all this and take it in for the first time because, they're setting the stage and I didn't want to miss a single part of it. And, I remember hyper focusing and locked in on the part of Luke Skywalker is the last Jedi, right? That he was the last one that was around. And it just, the crawl was something pretty special in and of itself. Again, people in the theater, I think when I was there, a lot of the folks that I was in the theater with were very, of course, hardcore fans since we had been there. We were there for like the really super late and, early morning showings and viewings, but they were all just as excited and there was lots of cheering and didn't have anybody bring lightsabers, which I thought was kind of weird. I think I may have talked about that at one point on an episode, but nonetheless, it was still filled with people that were absolutely fanatical about Star Wars. And so it was a good atmospheric experience. There were people, again, cheering and laughing, and it just was, I don't know. It was a very emotional high to watch that movie. In fact, I remember coming out of that theater and I was trying to process everything because my emotions were so high. Like they were in the way of me trying to analyze and really kind of take in what I had just seen. And so I was thinking to myself, like, I'm walking out with a smile on my face and everybody's talking about Luke Skywalker being shown at the very end. And I mean, I didn't even know who some of these people were, and I'm talking to them. And I kept thinking to myself, well, thank God I bought another ticket here like in 2 hours, because in some parts, I don't even remember watching it, right? I don't remember watching certain parts of it because I was just so caught up in it all emotionally. So I don't know if your experience was the same, if you had a different experience. I'd love to hear about it. If this was, and I get it. Like I'm probably, especially now that I hadn't spent a lot of time looking to see what people are saying about The Force Awakens 10 years later, but I've got the general gist. There are some people that are really crapping on this movie, which I'm very surprised about, because those probably weren't the same people. I think they're looking at Force Awakens through the lens of, now that we have the sequel trilogy as a whole, how does this stand up? Which I think is fair. My approach to this discussion, this retrospective, was really to talk about what it was like at that time. And I don't know that my opinion has really changed anymore from the sequel trilogy, because I compartmentalize every single one of these movies. But if I sound like I'm gushing or being a fanboy, it partly is because I really had a great experience. This was a really great time in my life, just personally, everything that was going on. And then on top of that, getting to see Star Wars for all the reasons that I had seen or said. This was a really, really great time for me. I really loved The Force Awakens. And I would say it's part, if I look at all three of the sequel trilogy movies, this one and The Last Jedi kind of teeter depending on how I'm feeling. But there's no doubt that I go into this movie and walk away just super excited, feeling adrenaline rushed, and it reignited. I shouldn't say reignited, but it definitely added some fuel to my love and passion for Star Wars in all the best ways. And that was certainly what I was feeling as I was walking out of that theater. And I remember too, at the time too, I didn't really have a lot of people to talk about Star Wars with. I mean, I had my brothers, thankfully one of them's here tonight on the show. It was great to talk to those folks and some people that I knew, but I didn't have, friends that were as crazy about Star Wars. And I certainly wasn't part of this podcast or part of any kind of Star Wars fandom that I could speak to other people regularly. So I find myself leaving that week and joining all kinds of podcasts. I mean, I was just signing up for everything, and it felt like every day I'd sign up for a new podcast and one would pop up. And I was spent a lot of time driving back and forth from work at that time. And so it was a great way for me to kind of hear, be out of my own personal echo chamber and hear all these other people talking about Star Wars, The Force Awakens, and theories and all of that stuff. And it really just, it was a great time to be, a creator, but also as a listener, to have so many different options and so many different voices and varying degrees of voices and opinions to kind of hear about Star Wars. Great moments at that time too. Okay, so I do want to talk about maybe some of the bigger moments in Star Wars. I think I'm going to do, and I've mentioned this before, I'm going to do more videos, but I may get into some of these in deeper context and more description, more detail a little bit later. But I thought what I would do is, rather than going through and saying, let me talk about all the things I love and all things about things I hated, I just want to kind of talk about the bigger moments in Star Wars during The Force Awakens that resonated with me, and some of the why as well. And then at some point, I may bring in some opinions about, what I didn't like or did like. I do want to talk about how the transition from 7 to 8, but I'll do that here at the very end. So I think, first I want to say, like, all the characters, I loved all the characters, all the new characters that were introduced, whether it was Rey, Finn, Poe, Kylo, Snoke as well, Phasma, BB-8. I mean, great characters. I love their design. I love what they did with them. The music was just phenomenal, whether it was, Rey's theme or Jedi Steps, the March of the Resistance, Star Killer, right? That moment in Star Killer, I'll talk about that here in a second, but when it fires upon the Hosnian Prime system and the way that music's playing and the violins or cellos are going, I mean, it's just really powerful visually and audibly stuff that I really loved it. But John Williams just, I mean, he killed it in this one. I listened to the soundtrack today just to kind of play it. I hadn't listened to it quite honestly in a while. I'd listened to certain tracks, but not beginning to end. And it's a very, very, very cool experience to listen to it all over again. So if you've haven't gone back and listened to it recently, highly encourage you to do it. It's pretty amazing stuff from the maestro himself. But the big moments, Kylo's introduction probably goes without saying. Of course, I love the design of Kylo Ren, his helmet, the idea that he was this kind of mysterious character that had this old ancient lightsaber that had a hilt on it. You know, when he first comes out and we get Kylo's theme song playing, the idea that he had new Force abilities, which was really awesome to finally canonically get new Force abilities, whether it was, you know, the Force stasis or him being able to pull memories out of people's minds. You know, him being able to kind of make Rey pass out and all that. Very, very cool stuff. Things that we had never seen before. Really loved the idea that we got all that with Kylo Ren. But his introduction was super powerful, I thought, when he came off that shuttle there. I love Finn and Poe's escape, right? The idea that we finally had somebody who was a defector from the I would say the Empire, but the First Order. You know, having that storyline and him being a stormtrooper and kind of being nothing. I never once considered him being a Jedi, even though during the poster that was shown, you know, we saw him holding the lightsaber. I mean, I knew they were kind of alluding to that, but I wasn't really in on he's going to be a Jedi. I thought it'd be awesome if he did, but I really thought they were just trying to trick us with all of that. And by the time I left this movie, of course, I felt like, okay, I was right. Of course, I turned out to be wrong. But yeah, maybe more on that later or another time. But that whole scene of them getting in there and escaping and some of the comedy bits of, you know, of them talking back and forth. He's like, you need a pilot, I need a pilot. I mean, I loved all of that. Loved them the way they were taking off and the music's playing and them. You feel like, holy crap, the heroes they got away and they didn't, right? Kind of subverted expectations because they crash land a little bit later. The Falcon taking flight for the first time, right? The garbage will do. That moment was a very special moment. And it was very slick the way they did that, because when you go back and you watch it now, of course, we see the Falcon. You can see the landing gear down on, you know, it's there. It's almost inescapable. You cannot not see it. Yet that very first time that you witness it, you don't see it. And that's the beauty of it. And for them to kind of go back and to Rey get in there and fly it and, you know, get the music, the Star Wars theme is playing. It was a really, really special moment for them to kind of get in that. So I enjoyed that. Also liked Snoke's reveal. Like Snoke, you know, your Snoke theory sucks, right? Is still probably a great motto. But the mystery, the intrigue, the idea that there was this other Sith Lord that had come to power now, and this is all things that we were thinking and speculating about, was really, really intriguing. And seeing Snoke for that very first time, and he's a hologram, and he's like massively large, and he's disfigured in a lot of ways. This is the Abrams stuff, right? This is the mystery box stuff, which I'll come back to here in a little bit. But the mystery box stuff, just throwing tons and tons of things at you that make you wonder, make you think without really giving you any resolution, is very much of the recipe for J.J. Abrams. It's definitely the way he writes. And I loved it. I loved everything about it. I love the fact that we had Snoke. You know, I had a lot of questions, like the entire world did, about who he was and what was his role in, you know, the fall of Ben Solo. All of that, of course, for better or for worse, does get resolved in future movies. But the idea that he was there and was just, again, another special moment, getting to see him for the first time. I do want to talk to you, as far as really good moments, I want to talk about the Han and Chewie moment. Now, the Han and Chewie moment, that was kind of spoiled when we got to the second trailer. This is the moment where they come into the Falcon for the first time. And of course, he says, Chewie, we're home. That had been spoiled in the trailer. And it didn't take anything away from it, right? I think it was still a very chilling moment to experience when we saw the movie. But, you know, having them in the Falcon was certainly special. But the one moment that really stood out for me for Han Solo and being in the Falcon, when he's confirming to both Finn and Rey about the Force and Luke and all. I've got it here. I just want to read it because it's really, in my opinion, it's very good writing. It certainly pulls at your emotional heartstrings if you're a huge fan of, again, the original characters. But he says, ever since Luke disappeared, people have been looking for him. He was training a new generation of Jedi, one boy, an apprentice, and he delivers that line. If you watch Han Solo or you watch Harrison Ford, he doesn't even phase. It doesn't even phase him. Like he's talking about his son, and we're going to get that answer a little bit later. So it's not like he didn't know, or from a script perspective, he definitely knew. But I love the fact that he delivers that line very stoically, without any kind of emotion that it's his own son. But he says, "One boy, an apprentice, turned against him, destroyed it all. Luke felt responsible. He just walked away from everything. People that knew him best think he went looking for the first Jedi temple." Okay, pause. Like when you hear that, as a fan of the original trilogy, as a fan of Luke Skywalker, as a fan of the Jedi and the history of the Jedi, and someone who was coming from a lot of Legends, material, to hear that was like, whoa, like that is huge. Now we've got some information about why Luke disappeared. We got context that he had started a new temple. He started a Jedi Order. Immediate flashback to the New Jedi Order books that we had read. Right, all this stuff was really kind of falling into place, and to know that he went back to the original temple, which was crazy to think about, was thinking, oh crap, he went to Tython. Of course, it wasn't Tython; it was another place that would be revealed in The Last Jedi. But in my mind, that's what I'm thinking. We're holy crap, we're going into Tython stuff. Anyways, he continues on talking about the Jedi. He says, "I used to wonder about that myself. Thought it was a bunch of mumbo jumbo," which is a great line. A magical power holding everything together, good and evil, the dark side and the light. Crazy thing is, it's true. The Force, the Jedi, all of it, it's true. Those lines are now a meme of sorts, but absolutely immortal if you think about where his character came from back in A New Hope, right? When he's mocking Kenobi's training of Luke Skywalker. Just to see that kind of come full circle, and to hear him say that in his own words and have the conviction that he has as he's delivering those lines is a really, really special moment, and one that has honestly stayed with me for years. Rey's vision. This is another moment where this is like Abrams the Abrams stuff at its highest. I'm going to throw a bunch of stuff at you. Some of it's going to really freak you out. Some of it's going to really make you think and wonder. I'm not going to explain any of it at all. None of it. And it's just there to really get you thinking and talking. And he did it better. I don't know that anybody does it better, but Rey's vision when she touches the Luke Skywalker, the Skywalker lightsaber, you get the flashbacks of Empire Strikes Back, where Luke and Vader are fighting there on Cloud City. I mean, we don't see them. I think originally in the script it called for that. They had like an actor that was going to come in and kind of play show Luke from the backside of him fighting, but she was supposed to see that. But it's no doubt, unmistakable that isn't what we're seeing there. That is definitely that area where they were fighting there on on Bespin. We get to see Luke Skywalker, with his hood on, and definitely referencing the fallen temple. Things are laying in ash. He's putting his hand on R2-D2. That's our first time seeing R2. It's our first time seeing Luke Skywalker. Powerful stuff there. And then that scene with Kylo and the Knights of Ren, and stabbing someone and then dropping them, and then looking almost at Rey as though they know her, or they see her, or they recognize her in the moment that she's having the vision, had us talking about it. We were speculating, did he really see her? Was this a flashback? Is it something? Is it the future that we're seeing here, right? We knew nothing about this. And then probably the more divisive and talked about scene of that vision is Rey as a child, and Inkart Pluck holding her hand, and the ship taking off, and you're left to wonder, like, why was she left on there? And she had already said that she'd been waiting for somebody, and now it's probably her family. But what happened there? What was going on? What was the origin for Rey? Not told. We weren't told. Again, part of the whole mystery box, and then obviously the last bit of it was foreshadowing the fight between her and Kylo Ren at the very end, which we would get some resolution to. We would definitely see that by the end of the movie, but just really great stuff from love it or hate it. I loved it. I thought it was amazing stuff. And again, it speaks to that whole J.J. Abrams, mystery box stuff. But, even that, like all the voices as well, that's been analyzed to the nth degree about what we were hearing, who was talking at different points. Good stuff. And ending with, Maz Kanata saying, and now it calls out to you, right? That lightsaber was once belonged to very powerful Jedi people, and it called to them, and now it's calling to you. And so therefore we could deduce at that time, although we probably weren't thinking about it, that she was going to be, or was very powerful in the Force. She just didn't know it yet. A couple of moments here, a couple more moments. Hux's speech, when he's sitting there talking about the First Order, and this will be the end of the Republic, and that whole Nazi kind of aesthetic that was going on. I mean, his portrayal in this movie completely changes by the time I think we get to The Last Jedi, and then it changes again when we get to The Rise of Skywalker, and that's not really Gleason's fault, but he was much more vile and sinister, I think, during this movie than he was, but he does a really great job of delivering the speech and really getting us to say, I really hate Nazis and want to punch them. Amazing job at that. The music that's playing, the way it's swelling as he's delivering that speech. And then when we cut to the actual Starkiller base, starting to fire up and launching the blaster bolts or the lasers out to the different systems. And I mentioned that, that shot of Kylo Ren there on the bridge, and you can kind of just see, there's lens flare from Abrams coming in. He's kind of slowly, pulling in tight, and you can see the laser beams that are flying across the space there right in front of him horizontally. Really good stuff. I mean, just cinematic stuff. The choreography of all of that, or the cinematography, all of that was really amazing. And then, we get the planets that blow up in Hosnian Prime. And I remember at the time thinking, I don't know who these people are. I mean, I get it. That's where maybe the new, headquarters is, like whatever happened. I don't know what happened to, Coruscant or any of the other places like Corellia or some of the other big planets, but okay, whatever. Hosnian Prime. Sure. Okay. So I didn't really feel bad as much as, I mean, I know billions died, but it was still a cool moment to see, and to see that the power from the Starkiller base was that powerful. Quickly on Starkiller base, I loved it. And I know one of the criticisms of this movie is that we lean too much on New Hope, right? There's a Death Star. Now there's a bigger Death Star. We're going in, we're going to blow it up. I get all that. I'll talk about that here in a little bit as part of the legacy, because it was formulated that way and for a reason. And I'm here to kind of justify it, as though even if you may not have liked the idea that it was a retread and they kind of walked along a lot of the same beats that A New Hope had. But the idea that Starkiller base, I felt like, got a little bit more redemption, came later on during one of the Atlas books, where the diameter of our Starkiller base was the exact same diameter of Ilum. And this is before it was officially announced, right? Before we got the Clone Wars and we got to see all that, or not before Clone Wars, before we got confirmation that that Ilum was indeed the planet that Starkiller base was used, or was made out of. They were teasing this, all right? Pablo Hidalgo had already kind of teased that in one of those Atlas books. But the fact that it was Ilum, I really liked that idea a lot. I mean, I felt like it was a redemption for the fact that we had this massive planet, and I didn't mind the technology. Like, I thought the technology of the Starkiller base was pretty cool. I just had my friend Tim Urban on for a Patreon show where we talked about the science of Star Wars, and we were talking about, what it would take to actually blow up planets. And really, there are very few things, scientifically speaking, realistically speaking, there are very few things that have enough power to blow up a planet. And the idea of some kind of a system absorbing power, the power that's from a star, would probably do it, depending on how large that star is. So it wasn't out of the realm of necessarily possibility. I mean, it is nothing that we can conceive, right? But I like the idea. Conceptually, theoretically, I think it was something that worked and certainly fit for the First Order. But anyways, Hux's speech, great. That whole scene of them blowing up Hosnian Prime system was great. The attack on Takodana is still like it still gives me chills. I had a chance to watch this movie twice before doing this show. Both times I still got chills when we see those X-Wing, and we had seen it already in the second trailer, but seeing them fly and skimming over that lake, the way we saw that, and the music that's playing there, right? The X-Wing, Scherzo for X-Wings that's playing while that's going on. It really gets your adrenaline going. And, because our heroes are captured, it looks like the First Order has come in. Kylo Ren has got Rey. Things are going really bad. And suddenly here they come. The heroes come in over really low, very, very low over the water, led by Poe Dameron, now in his Black One X-Wing. Getting to see Poe Dameron too. Like, if you actually do the count, I think it's a total of 13 kills. He kills 3 stormtroopers on the ground, but in the span of like 10 seconds at most, he takes out a total of 13 people, right? 10 ships in the air when you follow it and you kind of watch that trajectory, and then the 3 people on the ground that he blasts. It's a total of 13 kills. And I know that line of, wow, it's one hell of a pilot, is kind of cheap and cheesy. I love it. I love the cheese on there. I love the fact that Poe Dameron is in that moment established as one of the greatest pilots of that time, of that era, and rightfully so. Like it, more on Poe Dameron, I guess, at some point, but I did enjoy that piece as well. I want to talk about Han and Leia reuniting. It was one of the more tender moments. We get the backstory a little bit of what their life was like, and it was no different than what we experience in Legends, right? They had they were arguing a lot, and they weren't always around for the kids. I mean, their kids in Legends were honestly raised by, Akbar at times. There was a lot of droids, like nanny droids or whatever, that would raise them, and so they didn't step away too far from that. I didn't necessarily mind the fact that Han, as a lot of people called him, a deadbeat father at that time, because I didn't know. And maybe this just comes with age. Maybe this comes with wisdom. But I think you tend to learn as you get older that you shouldn't be so quick to judge on certain things. And I know it's just a movie, right? But some of these things were hitting home with me personally as I was watching it. And I thought, okay, well, there's probably a story here. There's got to be a reason why all that stuff. And so I know Abrams took a lot of criticism for kind of going that direction and maybe doubling down or going down as hard as he did with the idea that at least from the perspective of just seeing the Force Awakens, that Han really had kind of stepped away from his son and stepped away from his responsibilities. And in some regards, Leia had did the same. I didn't go in looking at that going, well, I'm going to tear that apart and really talk about how much I hated it. I really walked away from that thinking I need to know more. Like, this is such a drastic change from where they were. And at least from the movies, not too far again from Legends, but I needed to know more. I wanted to know more about what that story was, because I think the way they delivered that scene was so tender. Like I said, it was very emotional. And, I felt for the characters in a lot of ways. And that's, again, kudos to the actors and certainly the writing there. But, and of course we get 3PO interrupting them, which was great, right? I mean, there was a lot of member berries, of course, in this one, but very reminiscent of the stuff that we got during Empire Strikes Back, and 3PO constantly interrupting them back in the fledgling, days of their relationship. There's that line too where she's talking about, she tells Han that he needs to try to reach out to Kylo Ren, to Ben. And, he says, if Luke couldn't reach him, how could I? That line, if Luke is a Jedi, you're his father. And the way that Carrie delivers that line, it's just, it's very powerful. Like it's very real. It's very powerful. It's very true. And I love that Han doesn't see it that way, because I think it's within character for him to kind of not see it that way. We talked about some of the powers there of Kylo Ren. I had mentioned in here about I had a note in here about him kind of doing the mind probe and pulling out the information from her. But, Rey also doing that in return was great. The attack on Star Killer Base, that I love that attack. I just wish it had been longer, honestly. Like, I wish they would have done more to see, or more. I wish they would have shown more of the aerial combat than we got. Don't get me wrong. I think it was great, them coming in, feeling like they were about to lose. And then finally, when they got the whole thing to kind of crater on the inside, Poe goes in there, and there's a great shot where we're kind of sitting right behind his cockpit, and he's kind of circling around, blowing up whatever it is one at a time, and then finally exits. I mean, all that stuff is great. And it's very reminiscent of what we got, probably more from Return of the Jedi than we did with A New Hope. But I wish we would have seen more of the dogfights, honestly. And not to say that we didn't, but it was just, a lot of it was in the cockpit. A lot of it was, tight shots on people talking, and not so much, the combat type style stuff. And, maybe I'm spoiled because of Revenge of the Sith, but I would have liked to see more. But nonetheless, I mean, it was great. The whole battle was really amazing to watch, and that one line, again, another line that I thought could be taken as maybe being cheesy, but it really stood out to me, where Poe says, as long as there's light, we got a chance, is kind of inspirational to think about. It's something that, would get played on in other movies later down the road, and in books that would get played on as well. So good stuff there. All right, just a couple more, and then I'll wrap things up here. As far as moments, the Han Solo's death. When Harrison Ford was cast, I was really surprised, to be honest. Given everything that he had went through with, Empire, and not wanting to come back after Empire, and then them writing that in the way they did, and then him actually showing up in Return of the Jedi. And, he's been on record of saying, he'd really want his character to die. Very surprised to hear that he was going to sign on. Now, that said, money speaks, and he got paid pretty well. But I did not expect him to come out of this movie alive. As much as I wanted him to, and as much as I wanted him to kind of stay on for the sequel trilogy and have him die off in some other story yet to be told, I knew he wasn't going to make it out. And the way that scene is set up, everything from the way it just gets kind of quiet, the sun's going down or the eclipse is happening or whatever it is, and that it just sets the tone for, okay, this is it. This is the moment. It's still shocking. It's still disturbing to see, in retrospect. I think, remember at that time, thinking or hearing Kylo Ren saying, I know what I need to do. I just don't know if I can do it. All of that was still part of the mystery. Like, it would get talked about and theorized and for years to come, honestly, until we get, until Last Jedi and even The Rise of Skywalker. It was really difficult to try to make sense of why he would do that. So because that wasn't explained, that was a very tough scene to watch. One, because of course Han Solo dies, and the way he dies, being brutally killed by his own son, the way he did, is a lot just to take in. To see Han Solo fall over the edge of that little, walkway with no rails, by the way, if that's a running joke on this show. First Order didn't learn a lesson from the Empire, but no rails. And when you see him go over the edge there, you kind of knew that was the end of it. And, of course, they cut over to Leia, and, she says that she can feel it. She felt it and that sort of thing. But it was a very, very difficult moment to watch. I remember in that theater, there were people that were really crying. I remember people saying no when it happened, like screaming no, like when it actually happened. And even in subsequent viewings, it was the same thing. But, it was probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest moment, one of the bigger, if not the biggest moment in Star Wars, at least for people like myself who grew up with Han Solo. Seeing him actually go out the way he did was very, very difficult to watch. So, and then the last big moment for me is, of course, the Kylo Ren, second last, Kylo Ren versus Rey, and it starts off with, of course, Finn fighting him and seeing Finn like actually put up a good fight. And, we got some kind of inclination that he had some experience with that little thing that he was using. I forget what it's called now. So, he was trained as, even though he was doing garbage stuff or whatever, he was still trained as a First Order stormtrooper. So it makes sense that he would have some kind of proudness. Now, in retrospect, the fact that he was Force sensitive, you could probably say, okay, well, maybe this was, his own raw abilities were accented by the fact that he was Force sensitive and just didn't realize it at the time. And that's why he was able to kind of get a shot on Kylo Ren when he hit him on the shoulder there. But seeing him get hit after Kylo Ren hit him, I thought he was dead. I thought he was gone. Didn't think he'd live in that moment itself. Him saying, Kylo Ren, when he says that lightsaber, it belongs to me. Love the way Adam Driver delivers all of his lines, honestly. But this scene in particular and that battle in particular is really some of his best stuff as far as acting goes. And he's got some other moments, of course, in the later movies, but this was really kind of the pinnacle for me in terms of what he was doing with the character. And then there was, I don't even know how to say this. I don't know what words at this point to even use to describe this next scene, but when he reaches out for that lightsaber and he's using the Force to pull it to him and he's struggling and doesn't realize that something else is pulling at it. And, it flies off and it whips past him and he kind of gets out of the way, and Rey catches that lightsaber and she ignites it and the music plays right when she catches it, the way John Williams' score starts to swell there. Oh man. You talk about cinematic movie moments. That is a huge, huge moment for The Force Awakens, and the cheers and the screams and the yeses and everything else that people were yelling when that moment happened, even though we had no idea like how the heck this even happened. We were all so caught up in that moment, so caught up in all the emotion and everything that had just happened with Han Solo and his death. We were coming up to the very end of Act 3. It was a really cool experience to be there with so many other fans that were feeling all those same emotions that you were feeling, seeing Rey ignite that lightsaber and knowing that she was going to put up a fight, not trying to make sense of it, right? We were just caught up in the moment of the fact that she now had a lightsaber and she was going to put up a good fight against Kylo Ren. The actual fighting that they did, with when they finally lock lightsabers, and you get that, Abrams slows the camera down. The lighting between the blue and the red and the snowy white was great. But when they lock those lightsabers and it slows down, and you can see her leaning into the Force, maybe not knowing what she's doing, but she's definitely leaning into the Force. She's, taking a breath, and she's calming herself down, trying to come to peace. And at peace is where she finds her strength, and she lashes back out at Kylo Ren and starts whooping his butt. And that last, this moment where they've got, they're locking lightsabers and arms, and, it's kind of Kylo Ren's lightsabers down on the snow, and the snow's melting. You get steam popping up, and, finally her, kicking him away and striking him across the face. It's just, I don't know, man. It's really up there in terms of like Star Wars fights. Not necessarily from the choreography perspective, but just the emotional weight and impact of that scene. And, it's really hard to kind of put up against anything else. So, and then lastly, I do want to just quickly talk about the final steps. So the music playing during Jedi Final Steps, and that final scene where she goes to Ahch-To and walks up all the Jedi steps, seeing Luke there, seeing his reveal. I knew the movie was already going to come to an end. I mean, we were at time at that point. A lot of controversy around whether or not, did they oversell the fact that Mark Hamill would be coming back as Luke Skywalker in The Force Awakens? I didn't mind it so much. I never felt cheated that, we were teased about it to the extent that I was hating it or really pissed off. But I really wish I would have seen more. What it did do, though, was really set the anticipation and the anxiety levels of what we were going to see in Part 8 at an all-time high. Like, I mean, it was absolutely through the roof, and it was everything that everybody was talking about after that movie was what was going on with Luke Skywalker. Why was he there? What's going to happen next? Great moment, honestly, and really cool shot the way, we got that aerial shot of him kind of panning around, and as the credits drop. That segue between Jedi steps and the final music was brilliant and perfectly timed with that scene. And seeing Luke Skywalker's face and just trying to think about what is he thinking? Like, what is he wondering? What is he seeing right now? What ghost has appeared before him? Because he does such a great job. Mark Hamill does such a great job of visually giving us a man who looks scared, who looks maybe scared, battered, beaten, certainly in exile, unkept in a lot of ways. It was just, it was very, very intriguing. And we definitely all wanted to know more about where this series was going to go, where the sequel trilogy was going to go. Okay. The criticisms, I talked about the retread already about it on A New Hope, love it or hate it. I thought he did a great job. And here's why, because this was kind of an impossible mission, no pun intended there, for J.J. Abrams, right? They had tasked him with not only bringing back Star Wars, revitalizing it in a lot of ways after 10 years, but he was also tasked with trying to bring in a new generation of people. And so I think he did a good job. I mean, he did exactly what needed to be done, in my opinion, to not only bring in the original fans like myself, but then bring in new fans that would love these new characters. And I will attest, and I attest to this all the time, but my kids, this is their sequel trilogy. They will not watch A New Hope. They will not watch the original trilogy. They will not watch the prequel trilogy. But if I put on The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, or The Rise of Skywalker, they will actually come and sit down with me and they'll watch it because those are their characters. Those are the ones they grew up with. And, there may come a time where we have this renaissance of people that loved the sequel trilogy and they loved The Force Awakens. Well, I kind of love The Force Awakens, but younger kids, right? You think about 2015, those kids now are somewhere between, 15 and maybe 25 years old, right? So now they have kind of disposable income and they are at some point going to feel like, hey, what happened to The Force Awakens? What happened to the sequel trilogy? And they're going to go through all of that. So I think he did a good job of bringing that together. There was enough in there, maybe too much at times. Agree. I can give it that. But there was enough in this movie that allowed people to really reconnect with thematically what was going on in Star Wars because of some of the stuff that was really on the nose in terms of kind of the retreads, but there was enough in there that brought in the new people as well. And so I felt like it was a healthy balance. I feel like there was a lot of people that went into this movie and walked out thinking, holy crap, Star Wars is back. This was a great Star Wars movie. it was only years later, and maybe even now, that we're looking back sometimes and thinking, okay, was it really that great? Did they really have to go that far and give us so many member berries and give us so many retreads of, a Death Star, now a bigger Death Star, and they blew it up? And I get it. I mean, a lot of desert planets. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between it, but again, it was very prescriptive because I think it had to be in order to bring in those people. And this leads into kind of like what ultimately The Force Awakens did that we see a lot of movies now doing today, and that is it really kind of birthed this idea of the requel, right? It's not necessarily a sequel, and it's not a reboot, but it's a requel. It's something in between all of that. Bringing in the old cast with the new cast. We would see this later get repeated with tons and tons of other movies out there. There was Top Gun was one that came out. Scream, The Matrix Revolutions, Ghostbusters Afterlife. The list goes on and on and on, but it was a formula that would get repeated for movie companies to figure out a way to, again, carry on the legacy of movies that had been well established in the 80s and 90s and bring in a new group of people that would love them as well as bring in the old group as well. So from that perspective, I think it was absolutely mission accomplished, and it was a very successful mission to do all of that. And again, it birthed the idea of a requel. I've talked a little bit about the other criticism, again, is the mystery box. And it's just insane how many questions we left, right? How many things were answered in The Force Awakens, but how many things were not answered in The Force Awakens? How did the First Order come to power? Who the heck was Snoke? How did he come to power? How did anybody not stop him, not see him? Whatever happened to the New Republic, right? Where did they go? Why is there a resistance? Why does the resistance exist, and yet we still have the New Republic? How did that happen? How did Rey become so powerful so quickly? I mean, you walked out of this movie with so many questions and so many things that were unanswered that it had people talking, and it made Star Wars relevant once again. And again, I know for all the criticism that Abrams takes for this stuff, it was probably the best thing for them. It probably was the best thing. I mean, there's other ways to go about and do it, but you talk about, some of his more successful pieces and some of his more successful works in terms of what he's trying to do. This was it. Like, this was probably one of the best, if not the best, J.J. Abrams stuff that we got from him. So, it's all fair criticism, I guess, is what I'm saying. Okay, let me wrap this up in the conclusion. So I'm happy that this movie was made. Very happy with how it turned out. It, again, didn't necessarily rekindle my love for Star Wars, but it did add more fuel to the flame. It did awaken, for lack of, no pun intended, but it did awaken a lot of fandom for people that either had lost connection with Star Wars or had never really been a part of Star Wars. It did exactly that. It really awakened a lot of things in people for Star Wars and the love for Star Wars. I mean, again, I mentioned I've got fond memories of my life during this time, and this movie 10 years ago was a very special moment for me. And this movie coming at the very end of December for that year was just the proverbial cherry on top. Really enjoyed it. Watching Star Wars with my kids, new Star Wars with my kids that they had never seen, was an incredible experience, something that I'll never forget. And just all of the merchandise that we bought afterwards, and then running around with Kylo Ren swords and Kylo Ren masks. And, we went to Build-A-Bear, and we got they were little at the time, like 5-6 years old, but we went and got Build-A-Bear, bears that were the Force Awakens theme. They still have them out there somewhere, but I mean, it was a very beautiful time to see my own family, having their own Star Wars and really bringing it into their lives the way they did. It was super special. And then I've mentioned this before as well, but I've talked about my boys a lot, but my daughter, very, very young at the time. She would have only been about 1-2 years old when The Force Awakens came out, but she was into Star Wars enough that she loved Rey for no other reason than Rey was a girl. And that is it. It's as simple as that. Rey was a girl that was in Star Wars, and it was finally something that she was resonating with, like she was seeing, and that turned into Rey bed sheets and her wanting to be Rey. I've got a picture one year where she dressed up as Rey when she was like 4, I think, 3 or 4 years old. It was right after The Last Jedi. She's got the whole get up on. We did her hair in that way, and The kids were still into Star Wars at that time yet, and so they were all. I mean, that year we were all dressed as Star Wars characters, but it was just it was a special time. Again, the fact that my kids and my family now had Star Wars to be a part of, and it wasn't just Dad pushing the original trilogy on them or the prequel trilogy in a lot of ways. And then this was, again, of course, the most obvious thing, that the birth of the Disney era of Star Wars. Love it or hate it, like I said, they've done a lot of things incredibly well. They've fumbled a lot of things. I think there's probably more highs and lows, in my opinion, but it's been far from perfect. I will give it that, but it really did give us so much more Star Wars in ways that we had never thought stories that we never thought that we were going to get, whether that was Galaxy's Edge, right? That was, we got the theme park. Mando and Grogu would come out a little bit later. Andor would come out. We got Rogue One, the rest of the sequel trilogies. We got, as a result of Disney coming in, we got the High Republic era of storytelling, which I absolutely am a huge fan of. Loved all of that. And then, looking ahead, we've got Mando and Grogu movie coming out next year. We've got Starfighter coming out in 2 years from now. We got the Kinberg series trilogy that potentially may or may not come out. Rey's movie that may or may not come out. The idea here, again, is to kind of bring it all the way back to the very beginning of where I started this conversation and discussion, is that this was what Lucas wanted. It may not have turned out exactly how he wanted it to look, but this was the intent, right? He knew that this was bigger than him. He knew that Star Wars was bigger than him, and that it was for more people yet to be known, to be identified. And because of this sale, it really did open up and make Star Wars bigger than it ever has been. I know it's hard for people that live in their bubbles and live behind this wall of hate to acknowledge the fact that Star Wars is larger than it ever has been. It may not be for certain pockets, and it may not be for certain demographics, but holistically, when you look at the fandom, when you look at Star Wars now, it is bigger than it ever has been because of all of this and because of things like everything I just talked about. But it all started with The Force Awakens. And for that, I think we have a lot to be thankful for. We have a lot to thank Kennedy, Abrams, Arndt, Lawrence Kasdan, all of the producers that went behind this, Bob Iger, who was behind a lot of this. It was a good move. It really was. And I say that in all honesty, and again, with the benefit and the perspective of where we are today and the potential for where Star Wars will go in the future. So I know I've been talking a lot, and I didn't get a chance to get to a lot of the message. I do appreciate everybody chiming in here. Some really good stuff in here. I have seen a lot of the good comments in here. So before I get out of here, I just want to say thank you to everybody that joined me for the live stream tonight. This is the first of several episodes still coming. I want to do some character spotlights. I'm going to do a top 3. I know Star Wars guys, Rob was joking about it in here, but yes, I do want to do a fact boy from a certain point of view, where we'll bring some Patreon members on and talk about our top 3 moments and our honorable mentions, which can be a lot. But I want to talk about our top 3 moments for The Force Awakens and so much more, right? This is just, I know we're towards the end of December already, but this will probably and likely carry over into 2019, and so we'll be beyond the 10-year anniversary. But there's still so much more that I want to talk about with The Force Awakens and get really into some of the more details here on this stuff. So thank you guys, everybody that joined us for the live stream. Some shout outs here: Rob, Alex, Qui-Gon J, Music Train, One Up versus CPU, and someone else snuck in here towards the very end. I'm scrolling through all the comments. Jay Pillen, hey, thanks for being here as well, jumped in. So if anybody else is there and I didn't give out your name or you didn't give me a message, it's totally cool. I do appreciate y'all being here. Thank you so much for your support, for tuning in, for listening to me talk about The Force Awakens and my own personal experiences. More to come, like I said, on The Force Awakens. And then next year, we're going to visit the Skeleton Crew, because it's been a year now, believe it or not. I mean, it's crazy how time flies, but I want to have a retrospective look on the Skeleton Crew and so much more. So, hey, let me know what you guys think about The Force Awakens down in the comments below. Let me know what you think about anything I've said. What were some of the memories for you? What were some of the things that led up as far as pre-production? What were some of your favorite moments in the movie? What are the things you liked and loved? And what are the things you didn't like or love about The Force Awakens? I'd love to hear it. Love to engage with you guys in the comments down below. So that's going to do it for me on this show. Again, thanks so much for being here. Thank you also for the support. And I will see you guys on the next episode.
You're still listening? Wow. That's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.